Welcome to the Renaissance lecture on Ayyankali, Innovative Analyst and Strategist, being organized by the Vakam Memorial Research Center based at Vakam, Trivandrum. Today's talk will be delivered by Professor Joe, who happens to be the Professor Emeritus at Department of Sociology and Anthropology at the Mount St. Vincent University, Halifax, Canada. This session will be chaired by Dr. B. Iqbal, the former Vice Chancellor of the Kerala University and one of our patrons. I now invite Dr. S. Ayub, the Vice Chancellor of Kerala Technological University and a member of our governing body, to welcome the speakers. Over to you, Ayub, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Samir Munir. I'm extremely delighted to welcome all honorable scholars to this second Renaissance talk organized by the Vakam Maulavi Memorial and Research Center. Indeed, we are all very happy to have with us two eminent personalities, Professor Joseph Tharamangalam and Dr. B. Iqbal, to be a part of this Renaissance lecture. As we all know, Mahatma Ayyankali was a master strategist who was instrumental in the making of modern Kerala. All those who enjoy the benefits of human rights and access to the progressive space in our country cannot but gratefully recollect his historic interventions in the causes of the rite of passage and right of education. They traditionally designated millions of people, once designated as the untouchables, earned the minimum status of human beings only because of him. I must say, he was an exemplar whose intercessions addressed the entire tribe of Malayalis as a whole. Ayyankali battled on till the oppressed class got their inalienable human rights, but through embracing various forms of struggle. The undaunted right in a bullock cart on a public road, and the subsequent Chalia riots, challenging the sartorial caste codes by clothing lesser bodies, ushering a girl, Panchami, into the universe of letters, and the great call to shun stone necklace were all modes of protest and was novel for its time. It's worth remembering his criticisms of Hindu religion, enshrined in the caveat, we need not pay obeisance to a god who turns a blind eye when we suffer a battle, when we suffer a beating. Envisioning education as a community right, Ayyankali argued for it, relentlessly argued for it. The first strike in Kerala was not over labor rights. Instead, it was over the right to education for the children of the traditionally downtrodden and the untouchables. His actions were rooted in rationality, even when he exploited the possibilities afforded by the colonial modernity. Though the flame that he lit still burned bright, let us not forget that the caste system has not been eradicated. Most unfortunately, we Malayalis are not above practicing it overtly and covertly even today. Ayyankali will ever remain as an abiding inspiration in the outgoing struggle or in the ongoing struggle to overcome caste system and gender injustice and to uphold equal justice, egalitarianism, and democratic values in our country. Extremely happy to have Joseph Tharamangalam sir with us to deliver a talk on Mahatma Ayyankali, Innovative Analyst and Strategist. Professor Joseph Paramangalam is now an emeritus professor in the Department of Sociology and Anthropology at Mount St. Vincent University in Halifax, Canada. He had his MA Sociology from Delhi School of Economics and York University, Toronto, Canada. He also had his PhD from the same university. He served in various capacities, just to name a few, as a member of Nova Scotia Human Rights Commission, Government of Nova Scotia, Canada, a visiting fellow of our own CDS, as adjunct professor in International Development Studies, Dalhousie University, Halifax, professor and head Sociology Unit Institute of Social and Economic Change, Bangalore, honorary visiting professor of National Law School in India, Bangalore, honorary visiting professor of United Theological College, Bangalore, India. I'm only mentioning a few of them. His research interests have included such topics as religious pluralism and secularism, peasant movements and agrarian issues, caste and class, and international and national development issues. Many books are being published by him. A number of papers are being published in international journals. On behalf of all the organizers of the Vakam Maulavi Memorial and Research Center, and on behalf of all the scholars who are attending this program, I welcome you, dear Joseph sir, to this program. And we also have with us Dr. B. Iqbal, who needs no introduction. I'm sure Iqbal sir needs no introduction to all who are present here. He is an excellent orator, a health activist. He was a former Vice Chancellor of Kerala University, who changed the whole facets of the university system in Kerala University. I was fortunate to associate with Honorable Iqbal sir during his term as Vice Chancellor as a member of Senate. Then he was a member of the Planning Board in 2 times. He was the chairperson of the committee which drafted the health policy for our state in 2016. He was a leader of the People's Health Movement in India. Then he was one of the master brains behind the Health University in Kerala. He was the president of the Shastra Sahitya Parishad, so on. With great pleasure, I welcome Dr. B. Iqbal sir also to this function. And on behalf of Vakam Maulavi Memorial and Research Center, I welcome each and every one of you to this prestigious program. Thank you so much.
Good evening. I am indeed extremely happy for several reasons to be with you this evening, because to participate in the second Renaissance lecture. Primarily because this program is being organized by the Vakam Maulavi Memorial and Research Center. And secondly, more important, because Dr. Joseph Tharamangalam is going to make a presentation of a Renaissance leader of great import. In fact, I have a emotional attachment to Ayyankali in that I belong to Changanasheri, is my native place. And as you know, his journal he published, the magazine he published, the Sadhujana Parivalini, was published from Changanasheri, Tirkadithanam. And in fact, he had an office in Madhumula in Changanasheri. And there was a historical occasion which has been mentioned in a few books, that from his office he watched the upper caste Jatha, the Savarna Jatha, led by Mannathu Atnappan, as part of the Guruvayur Satyagraha movement. So that way, as a Changanashirian, I have a relationship with Ayyankali. And secondly, if you look at the Renaissance leaders in Kerala, there are a large number of uniqueness when you look at Ayyankali. First of all, the most important thing which I have noticed is that the organization he started, that is the Sadhujana Parivalana Sangham, interestingly was not named after him, his name or his caste, unless NSS or SNDP. It was called Sadhujana Parivalana Sangham, maybe poor protection organization. Maybe that was the first class organization that was established in Kerala. I do not know whether my Marxist friends will agree with me on this point. And secondly, in fact, the first agricultural laborers strike was organized by him in Kerala. Again, a unique incident in Kerala history. And interestingly, it was not for increasing the wages or service conditions of the agricultural laborers. It was entirely for getting the children of the lower caste in the government schools in Kerala. That was the government policy, but they were not allowed to enter the schools. So as against that, he started the agricultural labor strike. Secondly, compared to most of the other Renaissance leaders, Ayyankali was not that dedicated a person. In fact, he was, maybe can be said to be a relatively illiterate person. But nevertheless, his focus of activity was to get his followers educated. That was to empower the people with education. And there is a very interesting historical occasion when Mahatma Gandhi met him after the temple proclamation order and told him that now that your community members can enter the temple. He did not mind that words. In fact, he ignored the words of Mahatma Gandhi and said that his objective was to get at least 10% of his community get BA degree. So that was importance he gave to education. And lastly, he was a very gender sensitive person. This also should be considered. In fact, there is an occasion, again, a historical occasion in his life when he went to the Ururtambaram school, which was burned down by the upper caste people. Actually, he went there holding the hand of a girl student. So he was very gender sensitive also. So you can enumerate large number of such uniqueness in Ayyankali. But nevertheless, you see that there is a lot of black holes. I would say lot of gaps, areas, and lot of different views with regards to Ayyankali. In fact, once I wrote an article just to introduce the books written about him. That article itself was objected to by several Ayyankali scholars in Kerala. So there's a large number of different views with regards to him. His role in Srimulam Assembly need to be examined in some details. And I am sure that Dr. Jose Tharamangalam will be throwing a lot of life into the otherwise lesser known aspects of Ayyankali's life. So with with all your blessings, sir, I invite you to make your presentation. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you for all those good words and the introduction already to Ayyankali. In fact, I think some of you are better placed to talk about Ayyankali than I am. Let me start by saying, well, first of all, thank you for this great invitation. I feel humbled. And of course, I'm very delighted to join you. Let me start with some disclaimers. I am really not an expert on Ayyankali. I am not a historian. I will highlight some points from what I have understood or gleaned from my general readings, which has not been very extensive. I wish I went through all the documents pertaining to his tenure, his role in the Sri Mulam Assembly, all those 50 years, which I have not been able to do. So there are gaps. I was initially preparing a PowerPoint presentation, which I gave up and just decided to just speak. In fact, I started with a quote, which is quite familiar to everyone, and Dr. Iqbal has touched on it, where he said, if our kids are not allowed to enter your schools, your paddies will grow mere weeds. This was the slogan behind the first agricultural strike, which, as Professor Iqbal has well noted, was not really about agricultural wages, but it was in the context of school admission for Dalits, which was being resisted by the upper caste in spite of government policy to the contrary. So what do I plan to do? As I said, just to highlight what I think as a social scientist, an analyst of the Kerala social system, Indian social system, the caste system, which is getting, if anything, more entrenched today and not be annihilated at all. Just to highlight a few points which I think are interesting. So I will not say a lot about Ayyankali. The two speakers before me have already highlighted some of those points. Who was he? Obviously, all of us are agreed to say he was somebody unusual, a very unique, exceptional personality, a proud and courageous person with a high degree, unusually high degree of self-respect and self-confidence. He was also proud of his physical strength. He was a well-built person, tall and good-looking, and decided to display this. Also, his first, his bullock cart ride, he dressed up as I had a photo of that in my PowerPoint presentation, but I think it's also in the invitation. So he was somebody who was unafraid to challenge, to defy established rules. I'll come to some of these points later. There's also, and Professor Iqbal has spoken about it, so I won't go into it. So many firsts associated with his legacy. The first agricultural labor strike, the first person to ride a bullock cart, the first person to serve in the in any legislative assembly, and so on and so forth. And yet, he has not been sufficiently acknowledged. Historians refer to him as a missing chapter in history. That is itself an interesting point. Maybe we'll come to that later. And yet, I think we know enough things about him. We certainly know about his main struggles and his achievements. So let me get to my point of trying to highlight some selected aspects of his legacy. I want to start by saying, making a point which I think is true that his strategies, his policies, his understanding were different from those of other reformers. In fact, he was not a reformer, at least the earlier Ayyankali was a revolutionary. He was not asking for concessions. He was not asking for Sanskritization, for mobility. He was asking for annihilation of caste, to have the freedom to assert himself as a human being equal to others. So he was unique as a personality. Also, his understanding of the system, of the situation of the Dalits was unique and novel. So let me spend a few minutes to highlight what I think were some of his insights. He was not a social scientist. He was not a scholar engaged in analytical work. He simply perceived, he had insights into the system, into how everything worked. And first of all, I want to highlight something he was aware of. He understood that Dalits, or more broadly Sadhujans, because he was not talking about any particular caste, as Professor Iqbal has noted, the landless laborers in particular had capabilities, if I may use a concept widely now known, used by Amartya Sen and others. He understood that these people had capabilities. They had knowledge. Contrary to conventional wisdom, that these people were ignorant and unskilled. Ayyankali knew they had knowledge and skills. They had unique knowledge, not shared by other castes, the upper caste. They had knowledge of agriculture, of the ecosystem, of the soil, the seasons, the rainfall, water availability of varieties of crops, which soil was best suited for which crops, and so on and so forth. The skills that were used for agriculture, which benefited the landowners rather than themselves, but they had all this knowledge, they had skills of how to convert land into fertile fields. Kerala's unique ecosystem, ranging from the hilly areas to the watersheds in the west. They knew how to construct terraced fields, kayala, with a locally available material, and so on and so forth. They knew techniques and methods, not only with regard to agriculture, but to other artisanal professions, carpentry, blacksmith. These were professions that involved, unlike what people thought, this involved knowledge, including mathematical skills of a carpenter, of a blacksmith, how to calculate measures, and so on and so forth. So Ayyankali understood what I now call, these people had human capital, if we may use a modern concept. So they were endowed with capital, human capital. They had physical capital, of course, physical strength, muscle power, if you like, that Kanchaya Ilaya says the upper caste actually depended on the muscle power of the lower caste. They used lower caste gundas for their fights and so on. So they had And Ayyankali was quite willing to deploy this when needed. So he said, if you think you have strength, I have strength, I can show you. And this is what he displayed during his march, the bullock cart ride. He showed his knife, which he kept in his pocket. But if you attack me, I have this knife, and you will taste the blade, this sharp blade. And of course, they withdrew. And he was willing to use this for collective organized fights later. So they had, if I may call this physical capital, they had strength, organized strength. He understood that. They had social capital, if I may call this that, the sense of solidarity, which he used to organize the lower caste. They had a much better sense of solidarity, just like native peoples, indigenous people here in Canada, because their culture was such, they depended on mutual support systems, on caring and sharing. This was their insurance when they were suffering from lack of food and so on. So he was able to draw on this sense of solidarity to mobilize people. So they had social capital. So broadly, they possessed human capital, which he could utilize. Ayyankali also had a good understanding of the caste system, the system that controlled the Dalits. He understood the basis of upper caste power and control, how they controlled the means of production. But he sees a window of opportunity there too. Yes, they had legal ownership of the land, but they could not cultivate the land without the help of the Dalits. So that's the context in which he got his strategy. If you have land, but we can withdraw these skills from you. And that was what we did during the agricultural labor strike. And he understood that they had control over the means of violence. They could deploy organized muscle power. But there again, Ayyankali understood, this could be resisted by the lower caste, who could do the same thing. They were endowed with the same power if needed. Ayyankali had a rather noble understanding of freedom. Freedom is not something that is gifted to you by someone. So Ayyankali is not somebody who would say, give me liberty. He would rather say, I will assert my liberty, my freedom in the act, in the free act. So I am going to ride my bullock cart in this road. So I'm not asking you for freedom to do this. I am asserting my freedom in the act of riding. So freedom is something you exercise and you show, you demonstrate and assert. Let me say something about class consciousness or caste consciousness. Ayyankali did not spend time instructing his followers to raise their consciousness, to develop class, what Marxists would say, class consciousness or caste consciousness. He acted, he mobilized them. In the act, they developed consciousness. In and through the act of resistance or struggle, class consciousness was raised. And he was successful in mobilizing vigorous support from passionate and committed followers who never left him. Let me say a few things about his struggles. I will not go into details about his struggles. Just select a few of these. And these struggles were unique, I would say, in the long history of anti-caste movements. You know, the movements against the caste system were there throughout Indian history, from the time of the Buddha, of the Jains, of the Bhakti movement. And as my sociology professor, M.N. Srinivas, would argue, the Bhakti saints, what did they achieve? They achieved some mobility, but all these struggles ended up failing to make any significant changes to the caste system. At the end of the day, they achieved some mobility. Many of these movements became new castes. So you have the Ligayats of Karnataka, for example. These were all started as anti-caste movements, became another caste. Even Ambedkar, his neo-Buddhist group, well, he's just become another caste among castes. Ayyankali understood this, so he was not aiming. His movement did not aim at mobility within the caste system or Sanskritization by imitating the lifestyle of the upper caste. You move up. No, that's not what he wanted. So he did not want some concessions. So why is it so difficult to fight against a caste system? Why do all these struggles against caste fail? As a sociologist trained in the Delhi sociology department, where the Indian sociology was all about the caste system. Let me say a few things about the brilliance of the caste system. The most resilient and adaptive system of inequality ever invented anywhere in the world. The most inhuman too. Sections of the population of are excluded from the very domain of the human. Something that Prof. Iqbal highlighted. He noted that Ayyankali at least succeeded in including them in the domain of the human. They are excluded from the domain of the human, the spiritual. They have no rights even to listen to the scriptures. They are excluded from the domain of the moral, from sociality, fraternity, and so on and so forth. Actually, the Indian-born philosopher Akhil Bilgrami at Columbia University has noted that in some sense, even the slave system in the United States was better. The slave owners were quite willing to share what they thought were their enlightened faith, their church, their religion with the slaves, so that at least they had hope of a better life in the next world. Not so in the caste system. No, you are excluded from all means of enlightenment and destined, therefore, to be born again, reborn as Dalits, if not lower in the system. But it is a brilliant system, insured against rebellion from below. How? A system of graded inequality. It's the most brilliant part of it. And this is something Ambedkar understood. A system of graded inequality in which every caste, except the one at the very top, and that's not necessarily just Brahmin, it's because there are all these subcastes, hundreds of subcastes, 55 subcastes among the Nayars alone in Kerala. So except for the top in the system and the one at the very bottom, every caste is an oppressor and oppressed, and has an interest in maintaining her status in relation to the one below. I think this is a very important point. Even today we see, in the United States, for example, we see the working class whites called the non-college educated. In fact, Hillary Clinton called them deplorables. And of course, she lost the election. Well, why are they supporting these right-wing racist parties? It's a very important question, I think. They like to have somebody below them. I think that's the case with the caste system. So in the village in which I grew up, I could see Pulayers saying, no, we are not like the Parayas. We are above. And we don't eat with them. We don't intermarry and so on. So the caste system ensures that there can be no organized rebellion from below, because each caste has its own particular interests. Of course, it is backed by coercive power, symbolic violence, and physical violence. Symbolic violence is the ideological hegemony. So hegemonic control of what sociologists would call definition of the situation. So if I am a Dalit, I cannot define who I am, my being, myself, my identity is imposed upon me by the upper caste. So they have hegemony of defining who I am, that is my status. Of course, Ayyankali defines these and very spectacularly. Of course, symbolic violence is in the culture. It is systematic, but it is also backed by physical violence when needed. You can see, in fact, an increase of physical violence, particularly in northern India, in the context of some Dalits and lower castes making newer demands claiming rights, new rights. Also in the context of, the whole cow business, etc. Even being denied. I lived in Bihar, I denied the right to eat beef, which was basically the one thing, one source of protein for the Dalits. When I lived in Bihar, I could see this. Nobody else wanted beef, so the Dalits had access to beef. Not so today. Now, about Ayyankali struggles, I don't think I need to say a lot more. Some of the main struggles, the famous bullock cart ride, Villuandi Yatra. He flaunted his strength, his aristocratic dress and demeanor, also a knife when called for, asserting his freedom to claim his right to public space. Now, you may ask, why is the dress code or these symbolic things important? I will quote something from our own Sanal Mohan. He says, the mode of dressing is capable of emitting messages of dominance and subordination. They have symbolic value, actually very high value. Ayyankali later organizes pedestrian march, organized march to claim public roads. And he organizes the Ayyankali Pada. And he marches together with his Pada. They march over several public roads. And as you all know, this ends up in the so-called Talia riots. Several fighters even losing their lives. Then there is the agricultural labor strike, which, as Professor Iqbal noted, was organized in the context of the struggle for access to education institutions. The upper caste were resisting their entry in spite of government policy allowing them, opening these schools for them. That's when Ayyankali said, if you don't want, you cannot have our kids in your school, well, your fields will perish without any bearing any fruits. Now, each of these struggles was won, and each of these struggles offered a lesson, which the upper caste also understood, and they had to surrender during the agricultural labor strike, where they tried several strategies to beat the strike, tried to recruit gundas and turncoats, but did not succeed because Ayyankali foresaw this would happen and made sure that this was not allowed. So eventually, they tried to do the work themselves. And there's a famous quote, I think Ayyankali himself said this, or they said this, 6 Nair landlords could not do the same work as one agricultural labor woman could do in one day. So they finally surrendered, came back to Ayyankali and said, asked for concession, asked to make a deal. So each of these struggles was successful. Now I come to another phase of Ayyankali's life, and a long one, 50 years as member of the Sri Moolam Assembly. And I think this period needs to be studied more closely also, which I have not been able to do. What did Ayyankali do here? He was given a very high title and very honorable position. And he was successful in raising numerous issues, numerous petitions. Schools were opened, roads were opened, some very limited distribution of fallow lands. But what happened to his earlier struggles, the agricultural labor struggle? There was nothing similar ever again. What about the issue of land to the tiller? Apart from distributing some fallow lands to a few Dalits, land reform was not in the agenda. And Ayyankali did not raise this issue. And I would like to quote, I don't have that quote with me exactly, but something that my Professor M.N. Srinivas, the sociologist, said, referring to the Bhakti movement and the Bhakti saints. He said, and he was no Marxist, mind you, a conservative sociologist. He said these Bhakti saints do not seem to have understood that control over land was the basis of the power of the upper caste. And their demand for caste status without land, well, ended up in where they ended up. They got some upward mobility, became new caste within the system. So you can, the caste system is ensured, as I said, it makes allowance for mobility, Sanskritization, concessions, accommodation, when needed. When it is beyond what it wants, of course, there is the use of violence, etc., available, state power, including state power. But accommodation within the system is what Ayyankali finally accomplished. Far from annihilation of caste. No land to the tiller. And here, I would like to take a minute to raise an issue, which I think is very significant. Imagine that Ayyankali succeeded, or even later, early post-colonial India, independent India succeeded in giving some land to the landless laborers who would then become self-sufficient, productive farmers. What would have happened to the agriculture system of India, of Kerala, India? This is, of course, a big issue I won't go into. There's a big debate in agrarian studies about the unsustainability of the global food system, including the Indian food system. And this is important also in the context of the farmer struggles today. The global food system is dominated by global corporate agribusinesses, Cargill, Monsanto, and so on. And we are now coming to a time when scholars agree that this is not a sustainable system, apart from being exploitative, etc., and increasing global hunger. This is not sustainable. This cannot last. The clock is ticking. The introduction of the Green Revolution strategy in India, after an initial success, we now know it is not sustainable, depleting water resources, etc., etc., depleting the quality of the soil, traditional crops, and so on. So if small plots of land had been given to these landless laborers, would Kerala, India have had a more sustainable agriculture system? Despite all the flaws, did not China do? China actually did something similar. Actually, all of East Asia went through land reforms and have a much more productive and sustainable agriculture systems. So somebody like Nayanar, E.K. Nayanar, the Chief Minister of Kerala, said this. I think he understood this. He said, on the occasion of a celebration of Ayyankali's memory, he said this: if singing praises of Ayyankali and unveiling of his statue is to have any meaning, allotment of land for the tenants and pension for agricultural labor is a must. So getting back to Ayyankali, what happens during his tenure in the assembly? Even the Sadhjana Paripalana Sangam fragments, within the Sadhjana Sangam itself, the intercaste conflict, each caste demanding special concessions for itself. From what I read, even Ayyankali demanding some concessions for the Pulayas. So the caste system outwits Ayyankali. And that's a question. I'm not saying this. It is too brilliant, too clever. Ayyankali probably his greatest success in the field of education. Yes, he was successful in getting schools opened, in improving the educational standards of the low caste. But let's look at today. Where has it led? Why is there a continuously increasing gap? And I know it is there because I have done this, looked at the data. Increasing gap between the educational achievements of the Dalits and the upper caste. You can just look at the last 20 years, 25 years. How do you explain this? And this a century after all the reforms, Ayyankali reforms, etc. So just let me just highlight one aspect of this. Where are the upper caste going today to the so-called private English medium schools, the profit-making institutions, which is also attracting richer students from the Middle East, etc. This is where they go, while the public system is declining, continuously declining in quality, which is where the poor must go. Now, this is an issue. It's also, there's something similar happening in the healthcare system. Is another very important issue. Somebody like Dr. Iqbal, of course, knows this. And then let me talk about another thing here. So when all this is happening, what do the upper caste think? Have they changed their attitudes? They still think this is a matter pertaining to inherited merit. So there is a big debate about merit. If a Dalit moves up in the system, well, they must assume it is not because of merit. I think this is another area of research. Some PhD students can take this up, the whole debate about merit and reservation. Why upper caste people are unwilling to see merit. Are we back to the old ideology of the caste system and all the prejudices attached to it? That these people are born with less intelligence, etc. So I think I will stop somewhere here, raising just this question again. What would it take to achieve annihilation of caste? Not some mobility within the system, not some concessions within the system, which is what even somebody like Sri Narayana Guru aimed at. And they achieved it. The era was moved up in status, etc. But what about the caste system? It has become more entrenched, if anything. So is annihilation of caste ever possible in India? And this is not within the system, mobility within the system, but the system must go. Would we have moved towards this goal if Kerala, India had implemented the land to the tittle policy, empowering the landless classes? And with this question, I will stop here and hope that we will have a discussion. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Jose Tharamangalam. Dr. Tharamangalam has made a panoramic view of the struggles and contributions by Ayyankali. And he stressed that Ayyankali asserted self-respect and freedom. And he also introduced the recent concept like physical violence in relation to symbolic violence. And also he related Ayyankali's struggle to the recent farmers' struggle, the whole debate that is now going on with relation to merit reservation, and finally ended up with this perennial debating issue of annihilation of caste. So that was a very pertinent culmination to his talk. And I am sure that our friends will have comments to offer, questions to ask, and this is the time for it. There is no question or comment in the chat box, but you can do it directly. We have a few more minutes to spare. Thank you. I think you can straight away unmute and Dr. Matthew Kurian is talking.
Yeah.
Good evening, sir.
First of all, thanks very much for the very stimulating and inspiring talk by Dr. Jose. I do not know whether I am raising relevant questions. I like to raise two aspects after hearing from you. One is about you referred to Ayyankali's stiff standpoints. So my question, the first question is, we know that the whole spirit of Renaissance in Kerala was largely imported from Western Enlightenment. And the Protestant missionaries were very much instrumental in bringing that Enlightenment to Kerala. So what was the approach of Ayyankali towards this missionary enterprise, and what was his policy towards conversion? That is my question number one. Question number two, you referred to education throughout your presentation. Education was the most important aspect you hope. And I was very keen to hear from Dr. Iqbal as well as from you that Ayyankali had a very proper consciousness about the education which we had in Kerala, especially about the skill-wise. And it may be the traditional type of education, but the so-called education which was brought by the missionaries, exotic. And I think that is being vehemently criticized now. And you referred to the current situation of the divide between the upper caste and the lower caste. And I think that is largely due to the type of education which we have been nurturing. So my question is, was Ayyankali had any effort to rediscover the traditional type of education which you referred to extensively, along with the exotic education which the missionaries brought in Kerala? These are the two queries. I do not know whether they are relevant. Thank you very much for your presentation.
Jose, are you responding to this now itself?
I can. Or should I wait for more questions? Yeah, I will respond. Let me see. If I understood his questions correctly, he says the missionaries introduced Western modernity, Western kinds of education. And what was Ayyankali's attitude towards missionaries and conversion? From my reading, what I have understood is Ayyankali refused to convert, though some people actually asked him to do. So he was not for conversion. He, from whatever I know, he was not against missionary education. He himself was a practically illiterate person, but he understood the value of education, which, if you like, call it Western education, but basic literacy was not there. It's not available to the Dalits. So opening of schools to them was very significant, actually, Today we talk about the Kerala model of development, and behind that is universal literacy, which was finally achieved by Kerala, not through missionary education, but by public education that the government, the progressive governments of Kerala implemented, which is under threat today with this great zeal for privatization of education and healthcare, practically destroying the basis of what we used to call the Kerala model of development. And let me say something more about this. In the world as a whole, you look at even Western countries, even the United States, they have a public education system. Canada has a public education system where school education is free and universally accessible. And it is not, in fact, Canada has resisted any kind of private schools. We can't open a private school here. You need special permission. Some evangelical sects are allowed, but then there are all kinds of issues. So a good public education system is behind progressive modern countries, including Kerala model and so on. That's being systematically destroyed today. But I may be moving away from your question proper. So did Ayyankali promote traditional education for traditional kinds of skills? Maybe not. Maybe he didn't think of it that way. At least in the, I think there are two Ayyankalis. There is the original Ayyankali, is the great revolutionary, the bold, kind of a raw rebel. And then the one in the Sri Moolam Assembly who gradually becomes a political player, pleading for various benefits. So Ayyankali probably gradually moves to a position of not so much thinking of these, what I call the capabilities that they had already inherited, but getting a newer kind of education. I think that's what happened. Thank you.
And now Ike Dination has to say something, please.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. I have some doubts. I think I can speak to Malayalam and the doctor can translate to English. Right, sir?
I can understand Malayalam. I will speak in
Yeah, I will speak in English. വളരെ ഹൃദ്യമായ പ്രഭാഷണമായിരുന്നു. അയ്യങ്കാളിയെ കുറിച്ച് പരമാവധി അദ്ദേഹം നടത്തിയിട്ടുള്ള സാമൂഹിക ഇടപെടലിന്റെയും വിദ്യാഭ്യാസപരമായ അദ്ദേഹം നടത്തിയിട്ടുള്ള ഇടപെടലിനെ കുറിച്ച് പരമാവധി മനസ്സിലാക്കാൻ ശ്രമിച്ചുകൊണ്ടിരിക്കുന്ന ഒരു വ്യക്തി എന്ന അർത്ഥത്തിൽ എനിക്ക് ജോസാറോട് ചോദിക്കാനുള്ള ഒരു സംശയമാണ്. അയ്യങ്കാളി മുന്നോട്ട് വെച്ചിട്ടുള്ള സാമൂഹ്യ നിരീക്ഷണവും അതിന്റെ രാഷ്ട്രീയ പശ്ചാത്തലവും അയ്യങ്കാളിക്ക് ശേഷമുള്ള കേരളത്തിന്റെ സാമൂഹ്യ വികാസ ഘടനയിൽ എത്രമാത്രം സ്വാധീനം ചെലുത്തിയിട്ടുണ്ട് എന്നുള്ളതാണ് ഒരു ചോദ്യം. അതോടൊപ്പം തന്നെ കേരളം എന്ന് നമ്മൾ പറയുമ്പോൾ കേരളത്തിന്റെ വ്യത്യസ്തമായ ഒരു രാഷ്ട്രീയ വായന എന്ന് പറയുന്നത് ഇടതുപക്ഷത്തിന്റെ ശക്തമായ സ്വാധീനമുള്ളപ്പോഴും ഈ പറയുന്ന ദളിത് പിന്നോക്ക വിഭാഗങ്ങളിൽ നിന്ന് എത്രമാത്രം ക്രിയാത്മകമായി വിദ്യാഭ്യാസപരമായിട്ടുള്ള ഒരു ജനറേഷനെ വളർത്തിയെടുക്കാൻ നമ്മുടെ കേരളത്തിന്റെ പൊതുബോധത്തിനും പൊതുമണ്ഡലത്തിനും കഴിഞ്ഞിട്ടുണ്ട് എന്നും ഏറ്റവും ഒടുവിൽ ദീപാ പി മോഹൻ വരെ എത്തി നിൽക്കുന്ന ഈ തിരസ്കരണ മനോഭാവത്തിന് എന്തുകൊണ്ടാണ് ഇടതുപക്ഷം ഉൾപ്പെടെയുള്ള പുരോഗമനാത്മകമായി ചിന്തിക്കുന്ന കേരളത്തിലെ പൊതുബോധത്തിന് ആ രീതിയിലേക്കുള്ള ഒരു നിർദ്ദേശങ്ങളോ അല്ലെങ്കിൽ ഇടപെടലോ നടത്തിക്കൊണ്ട് ഈ തരത്തിലുള്ള വിദ്യാഭ്യാസ മേഖലയിലും മറ്റു പൊതുമേഖലയിലുമുള്ള ഈ ജാതിപരമായ അസമത്വങ്ങളെ ഈ കാലഘട്ടത്തിലും മാറ്റിത്തീർക്കാൻ കഴിയാത്ത പോകുന്നതിന്റെ സാമൂഹ്യവും രാഷ്ട്രീയവും സാമ്പത്തികവുമായ സാഹചര്യങ്ങളെ താങ്കളൊന്ന് വിശദീകരിച്ചാൽ വളരെ സന്തോഷം സർ. താങ്ക് യു.
Thank you. I am not sure if I understood you very well, but let me try to answer. Well, in the context of all the developments that has taken place in Kerala, what has happened to education? What has happened to the caste system? I would like to make one or two points. First, I am aware of the criticisms against the left, against the Communist Party by some Dalit scholars and also feminist scholars. Our friend Devika, for example, at CDS, and my own, including personal criticisms of EMS as a casteist. I'll say two things. Number one, the caste system is so entrenched in the culture. It's not easy to get rid of it. Even liberals. I actually included a quote from Ramakrishna Pillai, but then I also read a lot about the controversy that he was misquoted, etc. But something he said is, or he is supposed to have said, apparently wrong quotation from him, but it is that how can you put together a group that is cultivating the land together with a group that has cultivated their brains all this time? I think that is a relatively progressive way of looking at it. There are people who believe it's not just the brains of the Dalits, it's not a lack of cultivation, but they are born with the lower brains. This is part of the prejudice that is inculcated in us within the caste system. And all of us grew up with these kinds of prejudices. Some of us have moved beyond it, but these beliefs are not easy to get rid of. And in this context, probably, certainly some upper caste communist leaders inherited some of these beliefs. But in relative terms, historical terms, I don't think anybody was more progressive than the left in addressing many of these issues. And it's not quite fair to say EMS was casteist. I don't think so. I mentioned his name, but communist leaders in general, whether it's EMS or AKG and so on, certainly many of them had this prejudice. It's also a prejudice against gender prejudice against women, how Gauri Amma was treated and so on. It is true there was not enough of a critique of these issues within the Marxist tradition. And yet, class-based struggles achieved more benefits for the lower caste than caste-based struggles. Ayyankali himself, as Professor Iqbal noted, organized people on a class basis, not on a caste basis. So he did not lead a Pulaya movement. He led a Sadhujana movement. Sadhujana Paripalana Sangham was his organization. Of course, later on, again, and that I would attribute to the brilliance of the caste system. It is designed that way. I mean, whoever designed the caste system, you can't say any particular person or group did this. People refer to as Brahmanism. Maybe the Brahmins did this, but it is the world's strongest system of inequality, as I say, insured against rebellion from below. It has all these tricks. Actually, some sociologists has called it tricks to resist. Even Ambedkar's movement, what happened to it finally? Well, some achievements in terms of reservation. So I don't know if I am really answering your question. properly. But that's all I have to say, I think.
തൽക്കാലം നമുക്ക് ഇത്രേ സംസാരിക്കാൻ നിവൃത്തിയുള്ളൂ.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
വളരെ സങ്കീർണമായ പ്രശ്നങ്ങളാണ് അദ്ദേഹം ഉന്നയിച്ചത്.
Thank
എനിക്ക്
you, sir.
എന്നെയും പലതും പറയാൻ തോന്നുന്നുണ്ട് യൂണിവേഴ്സിറ്റി അനുഭവം വെച്ചിട്ട്, പക്ഷെ അതിന് ഞാൻ തുനിയുന്നില്ല. സീതി, നമുക്ക് സമയം മ്യൂട്ട് ചെയ്യണം. സീതി,
ഒന്ന് രണ്ട് ചോദ്യം കൂടെ ആകാൻ തോന്നുന്നു സാറിന്.
തീർച്ചയായിട്ടും. വേറെ ആരെങ്കിലും ഉണ്ടോ?
I would say, Professor, if you have something to say, why don't you say it also?
And I wanted to react to these public. See, I think contrary to popular perception, the public schools, colleges, and public hospitals are dominant in Kerala compared to private sector in terms of number of institutions and number of students reading, etc. Whether the quality is good or not is a different issue. If you take the public hospitals, in the early 1980s, it was only 25-26% of the people used to go to the public hospitals. Now it has gone up to 70%. Any medical college, I mean major medical colleges in Kerala, like Trivandrum or Calicut or even Kottayam, is far ahead of any super specialty hospitals in Kerala in terms of human resources, technologies, etc. And for your information, this is the only place, I may say, where 98% of the COVID patients were treated free in the government hospital, high level, high technology treatments in terms of ICU care, ventilators, drugs used, etc. So I think the public education and public health system is still dominant in Kerala, in spite of, if you look at the numbers, etc. But the general perception is that the private sector is dominating. And actually, the private sector is finding extremely difficult to run their medical colleges. Most of them are at a loss. The funding of government funding is far ahead of them. Because I was in the planning board, that is why I am saying. And my wife is working in a private medical college. So they cannot compete with the public hospitals now. I am talking about, but there are other issues. I am only talking in terms of coverage and funding. Well, Dinesham Paranjanodakoti, skilling issue is a major issue. Skilling, if you look at, you can say that there is a de-skilling has taken place. But currently, of course, we cannot tie these groups to the old skill sets. That is over. Now we have to constantly upgrade your knowledge and skill. And all sectors of the society will have to be empowered in acquiring latest knowledge and skills. So that is a debate again. And what about the tribals? We are talking about Dalits. In fact, it was very painful for me to hear the infant deaths in Attapadi. In fact, I visited Attapadi in 2011, studied it in detail, and in fact, written a book and submitted proposal to the government. And after so many years, in spite of spending so many crores of rupees, still infant deaths are being reported from Attapadi. And we are proud that our infant mortality rate is on par with that of America now, which is 6 per 1,000. But if you take disaggregated figures, regional imbalances, and vulnerable groups, our records appears to be really poor. So these are issues, and it applies to the Dalit group also. Anybody else? I am sorry I talked. Anybody else? Jos Chatukulam is here. He's silent. He's a great admirer of Jos Tharamangalam. And Sanal Mohan was here. I am not seeing him now. Then Radhakrishnan has left. Where are we? Siddhi. Unmute ചെയ്യണേ.
സമയം കൂടുതലായോണ്ടായിരിക്കും.
സമയം മോശം, അന്തരീക്ഷം മോശം, കാലാവസ്ഥ മോശം, അതൊക്കെ കൂടിയാണ്. Sir, your presentation was excellent. It thrown a lot of light into some of the otherwise not discussed areas in relation to Ayyankali. I think Ayyankali needs to be further explored. As you said in the beginning, that his role in Srimolam Assembly, I think a few articles have come. I don't remember who wrote these articles about his role in Srimolam Assembly. especially his struggle to get the Purambok areas to be allotted to the Dalits at that time, and so many other issues. So all these need to be studied, and I hope that the younger generation will take up Ayyankali for further studies, research, etc. And this will definitely fuel the ongoing struggle. Such studies are important. Such studies are extremely important to get these discriminatory practices over in our state. So thank you very much, and thanks Sidi for giving me this opportunity to chair this session. Also, I am very happy to meet Ayub here, who was a vibrant Senate member while I was the Vice Chancellor. It's because of helps from, because I was new to the university system. It was the help and advices from youngsters like Ayub that I could manage the university. So I thank him also for the introduction. Sir, when you come next time, you should definitely meet. Have you any plan to come to Kerala in the near future, maybe after the COVID pandemic is over? We should have a face-to-face meeting with him.
Yeah. No, he is. This is a point which everyone should know, that he is also holding Ayyankali chair in Mahatma Gandhi University.
And Jose told me that. I don't know.
Yeah, he was with us in 2019, early 2020. Initiated a few things. I am sure that this chair will do a lot of work that Dr. Iqbal suggested here, from the point of view of carrying on studies. Particularly, a lot of research has to be done along with that. Even Professor Joe has suggested this, that more and more research should be done in this area. Thank you very much, Professor.
ഞാൻ സീതി ഇച്ചിരി ഡേറ്റഡ് ആണ് 2015 വരെ. ഞാനപ്പോ ഈ പുസ്തക സഞ്ചി ഒരു കോളം ചെയ്യുന്നുണ്ടായിരുന്നു. ഒരു പ്രത്യേക വിഷയത്തെ കുറിച്ച് ഇറങ്ങിയിട്ടുള്ള പുസ്തകങ്ങൾ മുഴുവൻ റിവ്യൂ ചെയ്യാന്നുള്ള, റിവ്യൂ അല്ല ആക്ച്വലി പരിചയപ്പെടുത്തുന്നത് വേണം പറയാം. അപ്പൊ അതിന്റെ ഭാഗമായിട്ടായി കളക്ടഡ് മോസ്റ്റ് ഓഫ് ദി ബുക്സ് ആൻഡ് ആർട്ടിക്കിൾസ് ഓൺ പയ്യങ്കാളി ആൻഡ് പബ്ലിഷ്ഡ് ആർട്ടിക്കിൾ. ഇച്ചിരി ഡേറ്റഡ് ആണ്, നേരത്തെ ചെയ്തിരുന്നത്. അത്രയും ചെയ്തിട്ടുണ്ടെന്ന് ഇവിടെ പറയുകയാണ്.
We have to get all of them.
Yeah. So thank you very much.
Thank you all, and we have the next month a very interesting session by Professor Soya Hassan from Delhi. She was Dean and Professor in Jawaharlal Nehru University. Next month she'll be speaking on a very interesting topic. We are hoping that all of you will join us next month. Thank you, Professor Joe, Professor Ayub, Professor Dr. Iqbal, and many of my friends and colleagues from NGO and also from different places. Thank you all, and
Thank you very much.
Good day and good
Thank you
night.
very much.
Good day, I wish,
Thank you
because
very
we have people from Canada and other places. Thank you all.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.